Welcome to The Chemical Show, the podcast where chemical means business. I'm your host, Victoria Meyer, bringing you stories and insights from leaders driving innovation and growth across the chemical industry. Each week, we explore key trends, real-world challenges, and the strategies that make an impact. Let's get started. Welcome back to The Chemical Show. I am continuing our conversation here in the month of March with great women leaders in chemicals. Before we get started, if you are not already a subscriber of The Chemical Show, just do it. Hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're following us on, and follow us on LinkedIn. That's the best way to stay on top of all of our great interviews and other things that we publish. So today, I am speaking with Christian MacIver, who is the President and Chief Operating Officer at Pilot Chemical. Pilot is a privately held and independent global specialty chemical manufacturer, and I think that's always a great distinction since there's so much private equity in our industry. For it to truly be private and independent is a real landmark consideration. Christian's role, she has full responsibility for developing, executing, and delivering upon all the short and long-term goals, strategies, and other business considerations for Pilot. Christian began her career at Ingevity Specialty Chemicals, where she climbed the ladder and ultimately led some of the company's biggest businesses. She joined Pilot a couple years ago and is working her magic there. So, Christian, I'm so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Victoria. It's such a pleasure to be here on The Chemical Show.
Absolutely. So, what is your origin story? How did you get interested in chemicals, and ultimately, what got you to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. So, I have always loved solving problems. I can remember being a little girl and looking out the front window waiting for my dad to come home because he would give me math problems to do, really hard math problems. And I love that. And my dad and I, we would also do puzzles together, only we would turn them upside down and we would race, not being able to see the picture, seeing who could do the puzzle the fastest.
It's just based on the shape.
That's right, based on the shape. Yeah.
Okay.
So I just grew up with this love of solving problems and puzzles, which naturally led me to being good in science and math. I was probably one of the few students that actually enjoyed the homework because each of those homework problems was a little mini puzzle.
Yep.
And so I majored in engineering and chemical engineering. And I actually thought that I was going to work in a plant with a hard hat and steel-toed boots. That was what my plan was. But when I was interviewing, I had this interviewer who he stopped me like midway through the interview. And he said, "I know you want to work in a plant, but have you ever thought about sales?" And I looked at him like he was crazy because the only salespeople that I'd ever met were the guy in the mall selling vacuums and the door-to-door salesperson selling encyclopedias when I was little. And so I said, no, I would never want to go in sales. He fixed me up with one of his female technical sales reps who was selling industrial lubricants and put me on the road with her for a week so I could see what it was I was missing out on. And I tell you, from that point, I was hooked. So I totally switched my career search wanting to go into technical sales. So I think it turns out that interviewer was the good salesperson.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is, yeah, I think most engineers don't think about going into sales. And we all have these beliefs. I'm not sure I knew that I was going to be wearing hard hats, and yet I did for many years. But I think it's just an interesting part of the journey. And so have you always stayed on the commercial side of the business?
Yes, for the most part. So I had more of a traditional career track going into sales and then moving into product management, sales management, and then director, VP. But after many years on the commercial side, I actually, for career broadening, took a role heading up a global supply chain team. And that was really interesting because when I took the job, I didn't realize that 6 months later, the global pandemic was going to start. And so here I am really not knowing much. I still don't know much about supply chain, but being in this role, having to lead a global team of over 100 people through this crisis that nobody had ever experienced. Yet, and we had spent years trying to make our supply chain lean and to optimize inventories. And yet, suddenly we're having not to just have a plan B, but a plan C, D, E, as every day the challenge was much different. But what I learned in supply chain, it gave me such an appreciation for our team, because when I went into supply chain, someone I worked with told me this, and it's so true, that when you look back on wars in the world, it's the effectiveness of the supply chain that determines whether countries or armies win or lose wars. It's the supply chain. And the same is true in business, that it's how good your supply chain is, whether you win or lose business.
Yeah,
so I have such an appreciation for our folks in all parts of our supply chain.
Yeah, that is such a great perspective and so true, because as we've seen, I've been calling the 2020s the decade of supply chain, because starting with the COVID crisis and then continuing on, supply chain has dictated a lot of success and profitability for businesses of all varieties.
Yeah, you're right. It takes thousands, hundreds of thousands of things to go right to get an order in full, on time, in spec to a customer that's halfway around the world. Yeah. But it only takes one thing to go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And we take it for granted. So what brought you to Pilot? Because you've been at Pilot now for 2 years. So you were doing great in Ingevity. You survived the supply chain challenges of COVID. And now you're at Pilot. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I loved running a global supply chain, learned a lot. I was ready to get back to running a business, though. I love running a business. And when I was interviewing with the CEO at Pilot, he put the company's strategy in front of me. And this strategy, it's a diagram of a solar system. And at the center, the sun, are customers and the Pilot team. And yeah, that was kind of my drop the mic moment. Like, that was it. I was sold. I was ready to come to work for Pilot, because through my interview process and coming on board the last 2 years, a lot of companies might say that that's what's at the center of their strategy. But at Pilot, it really is true. It's our team, it's our customers, and everything we do. It's a filter that we use. Is this good for our customers, good for our team? So we live it, and it's so much fun. I can't wait to get to work every day and be part of making a difference in that way.
I love that. That is great. So tell us, other than customers being the center, the solar system and strategy for Pilot, tell us just a little bit more about Pilot.
Yeah. So we're a medium-sized chemical company, and you already mentioned that we're privately held. And, there's such a uniqueness in being privately held and medium size, where we can be quick and nimble. We're big enough to deliver and flexible enough to serve what our customers' needs are. But Pilot was founded over 70 years ago, and Pilot was based on an innovative technology. So our founder invented a new way to sulfonate, an ice cold way of sulfonation. And that technology, it imparts greater quality, greater consistency in essentially surfactants, which is what we still use that technology today for. So that's still a backbone technology. We also manufacture biocides and preservatives, and those products are used in household and personal care products, industrial and institutional, emulsion polymerization, metalworking, lubricants.
Awesome. That's really great. Thank you for that. So, Pilot seems to be in a period of growth and transformation. So you talk about your sulfonation technology. You guys have recently announced a plant expansion. You've announced some new strategic partnerships with COO and sustainable surfactants. And, I know there's been a few things really over the past several years. Is this a new pilot and a new strategy, or is it part of an ongoing bigger transformation story?
Yeah, I think that you do see, as you mentioned, you see some new announcements coming out from Pilot. And we have been dedicated to growth for many years. And I think in the chemical industry, you have to grow because your costs increase, and inflation and benefits, all of those things. It becomes more expensive to stay in business. So you don't have a choice. You have to grow. I think what's different, though, is we've gotten very specific about how we want to grow. And we call it our growth engine. And so our growth engine, how do we take advantage of our size, our ownership structure, our board who's committed to investing in growth, and what do we do with that? We're trying to invest more. We are investing more in those markets that are changing, because when there are changes, there are opportunities. And for a company of our size, we can change and adapt quickly and meet those dynamic needs of customers in those markets. So Victoria, two markets that we're focused more on now than we were a few years ago are household and personal care. And so products, specifically cleaning products in those end uses, those are what's changing today are environmental regulations. For example, like the low 1,4-dioxane regulations that have come out. Also, consumer preferences are changing. Consumers want more transparency. They want to understand what's in the product. And then sustainability trends as well in the companies that make those products. And so Pilot, we ask ourselves, how can we help our customers and the end consumers? How can we meet those challenges? And so that's what we're focused on doing. And that's why we're expanding our flagship plant in Middletown. And that's why we're focused on bringing a portfolio of bio-based surfactants to those markets.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And those are two really unique markets driven a lot, as you point out, by sustainability, by consumer preferences, and requires that adaptation and support. How is your team viewing this? So, right, there's a lot of legacy at Pilot, 70 years old. So you're probably implementing along the way in order to achieve this growth strategy, some changes around people, processes, customers. How are they responding?
Sure. I mean, no doubt we need some uses because they haven't been ones that have been such a focus as they are today. But our team is super excited about our growth engine, and they want to be part of the story, part of Pilot's success. And I've really been impressed by that when I joined Pilot, that Pilot's a company very low on ego, really high on hard work, doing the best job that you can, and focused on doing all of our parts to make the company successful. And it's really, I love going around and joining our CEO for our town halls and sharing with employees the difference they're making, how they're part of Pilot's success. It's really cool to see how the strong foundations that our team has built over the years, how we're combining that with new folks who've come on board and focusing all of that on delivering growth.
That's excellent. And I know the people I know from Pilot really love Pilot, right? They feel this strong affinity to Pilot, to its customers, to its business, and that shows. So, we talked a little bit about change, and one of the things I've been talking with people recently, they're just commenting on the rapid pace of change we're seeing here in 2025, particularly when we think about trade and tariffs and all kinds of policies that are rolling through with the new administration. How are those changes affecting you in Pilot? And how do you even get ready for the uncertainty of the changes that are coming through?
Yeah, and it's dizzying. And I just saw an hour ago that it's changed again, what the plan
day
is.
Day by day.
Right. In a company our size, we don't have a big team that we can go tell them to go work in a closet on this and tell us what the magic answer is, right? We don't have that luxury. So we are a lean team, and we do scenario planning. So we try to look at kind of 80-20. What do we think the outcome will be here, and put a couple different scenarios together. And then as it plays out, react from there. But fortunately, through COVID, we lessened our dependence on outside supply chains. So I'm not saying we're insulated from tariffs, because that's certainly not the case, but much less than we would have been 5 years ago if it had happened then. What I'm starting to see unfold is more of a willingness to work together across the supply chain. So this doesn't seem like there's any one party in the supply chain that is trying to stick it to the one up or downstream from them. I'm really seeing a partnership of how do we share in this together? How do we work through these challenges? Which is great to see that we've got relationships like that.
Yeah, and I think the chemical industry prides itself on its relationships and had to be strengthened through some of the supply chain challenges we've seen over the past few years. As we look at how business and markets are evolving, collaboration and partnership is getting redefined and becomes really critical.
Yeah, you're right. And, we've been in business more than 70 years. Most of our suppliers and customers have been too.
Yeah.
And you see this kind of balance of power that it shifts, right? Markets are short, markets are long, markets change. And we plan to be in business another 70 years. And I think the other parts of our supply chain do too. So, how do we look at this sustainably?
Yeah. Are most of your customers North America? Is that largely where you guys are selling and marketing today?
Our manufacturing base is in North America. So we have 5 plants across the US and Mexico. And about a third of our sales are outside of the US. So
Okay.
we manufacture in the US and ship all over the world.
Awesome. Love it. So, we talked a little bit about sustainability. We've talked about some of these supply chain and other things. The other thing, companies are really moving quickly on, or not so quickly, and wondering where they're going, is around digitization and AI, right? So I think 2 years ago, nobody knew how to spell AI. Today, it's part of our everyday conversations, at least. Although I think a lot of companies that I've talked to, in fact, I had a conversation just yesterday where they're like, we're trying to figure this out still. What about Pilot? What's your approach to digitization and AI? Is there anything new that you guys are rolling out, or how are you approaching it? Because, as you know, and we already talked about, changes are occurring rapidly.
Right, right. And it is rapid. And was very impressed when I joined Pilot at the level of digitization that's already taking place within Pilot. We have a digi team, and they also focus on automation. And I mean, just from like a data standpoint, just with a couple clicks, I can find out all kinds of information, and it's the same source of information that everyone in the company is looking at. So we're not reliant on spreadsheets. And I think being our size of a medium company, I think that benefits us in this way, that we haven't, our ERP system is pretty simple to navigate in order to extract the data, get it in one place. And also in our plants, we have invested a lot of money in automating our plants, looking at how we take out the human factor of possibly making mistakes, and how do we more do these things from control rooms. And our board has been very supportive of that, of automating our plants. And then as far as AI goes, we still have a long way to go in using AI, and it
As
keeps
does
changing.
everyone,
Yeah,
really.
but I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing how we can leverage AI and technology specifically. As the AI programs evolve, I think it's more ready for a company our size.
When
So
you
I'm
say
looking forward to
when
that.
you think about, is this about in formulations? Is it in your business lines? How do you see yourself attempting or trying to start utilizing AI more?
Yeah, I think on our marketing and business development side, there's an opportunity there. And in innovation, like product development and optimizing formulas, I think both sides of that. It'll be different AIs, but we're ready to look at what makes sense for us. And
Awesome.
I think like we're careful about what we invest in, right? Right? Like I don't know about being the early adopter, whether that makes sense for Pilot, but once something is ready and we see that it's going to add value, we're quick to step up and make an investment in it.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think, you know, I have said this before. I think a lot of companies kind of got burned by SAP, right? Like it's such a big, huge investment. And once you make the switch, you feel like you're stuck. And
Yeah.
so when we think about digital applications and AI tools, I think many companies are afraid of getting stuck. You don't mind being the leaders, you don't mind being fast followers, but there's a concern that what if we adopt the wrong thing for us, but then we're stuck. As I talk to people in technology companies and others, I do think the good news is that we're moving into applications that are more robust and resilient, being able to bounce in and out and not being stuck with a single platform, but being able to figure out what really works for you and adapt and evolve. Now, how this all plays out, time will tell, right?
Yeah. And I think about like how can we invest in technologies that allow us to do things that we're not doing today? And maybe if we were more back investing by having AI do things we're already doing, maybe we would have that stuck feeling. But I think today we're looking at how can this really superpower, supercharge what we're not able to get to today.
Yeah, I love it. That makes sense. Let's turn a little bit more to you. You joined Pilot 2 years ago, moving from a larger publicly traded company to mid-sized privately held company, Pilot. What was the biggest challenge you faced in that transition?
Yeah, great question. And I'll answer that two ways. One, I actually have to read all my emails now. So I used to get copied on so many informational emails, and I would get, hundreds of emails, and a lot of them I'd never even open, and nobody would notice. But at Pilot, a smaller company, medium-sized company, that doesn't happen. I'm copied on emails for a reason. And it's kind of having a smaller group who is informed on what's relevant in the company, what's material in the company. It allows us to make decisions so much quicker because we're already informed.
Right.
So that was a change for me. I hadn't even thought about that being a change. And then the second one, and this is a really good change, is that craziness leading up to a quarter. We don't have that being privately held, right? We don't have a quarterly earnings call that is going to impact our share price based on did we meet the analysts' expectations. And that is so refreshing that we don't have to compromise the long term for the short term. And of course, we've got end of the year targets, but we're not in the hot seat every quarter like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think two things. Number one, I think that, the email becomes, I think sometimes we don't understand our decision-making burdens that come along with it, right? And it's something that you come to grips with, right? Good and bad, in terms of just kind of the focus of role. So I think that's really cool. And hopefully you have fewer emails, Christian, and the ones that matter,
manageable. That's
who knows?
right. Yeah, it's manageable.
But I think this whole concept of having a longer term viewpoint is so critical, because especially when we look at the last few years, just the volatility in markets with supply chains being up and down and people being overstocked and understocked, public companies have really been whipsawed a little bit. Whereas with private companies, and I've talked to a lot of leaders from privately held companies, and it is a bit more of a balanced view. Yes, you're running your numbers monthly, maybe daily, weekly, who knows, on whatever frequency matters to you and makes sense for you to be effectively running your business. But you can look at a longer term view and know that it's not about the December 31st number. It's about, hey, we said we were going to get to someplace by May 1st, and let's track to May 1st, and that's what makes sense. And so being able to have a longer horizon and a more balanced horizon.
Yes. And we do look at our numbers daily, right? The numbers are still just as important to us. But if the numbers aren't what we expect, we're not going to pull orders forward or make cuts in investments in growth that we need to make. So it's really refreshing and great to have the board and shareholder support for that.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to close with a question around leadership, which is around, advice. What's one piece of advice that you've received in your career that you consider to be so critical that you now share it with others?
And I've been so fortunate to have worked with some great leaders. So I've learned from some of the best out there. So it's hard to pick one. One that has stuck with me is use your voice. And I can remember being in my first job as a salesperson and sitting around the table, and my boss was proposing that we go out and raise prices by X%. And inside, I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. I knew I was going to have a couple customers that were going to have a very hard time with that. And I didn't speak up. And the boss said, okay, everybody going to go do this. And I raised my hand with everybody else. Yes, we're going to do this. And sure enough, I lost a huge piece of business by forcing a price increase through that I spent the next couple years trying to get back. But I mean, that's one example of use your voice. But it's, now when I'm in a meeting, I make sure I'm sitting at the table. I make sure I speak up when I have a question about what's being talked about or a concern about what's being proposed. And that's what I'm hired to do. And I view all of our employees, we're hiring them for that brain that's sitting between their shoulders, and we want them to use it on day one. They don't have to have a certain level or be with the company for so many years. That's why we want them to lean in and speak up, use their voice.
I love that. And that is a great message. We have a voice, use it.
Yes.
That's great. So Christian, thank you so much. I'm really excited that we got a chance to do this. I appreciate you sharing insights with myself and our listeners of the Chemical Show. And it's been great to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Victoria. And I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Keep listening, keep following, keep sharing, and we will talk with you again soon.
Thanks for joining us today on The Chemical Show. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, share it with your friends and colleagues. For more insights, visit thechemicalshow.com and connect with us on LinkedIn. You can find me at Victoria King Meyer on LinkedIn, and you can also find us at The Chemical Show Podcast. Join us next time for more conversations and strategies shaping the future of the industry. We'll see you soon.